This is Christopher DeLay. I'm back with my PKI Basics series. So previously in this series I covered certificates, certification authorities, and enrollment. Today I'm going to be covering auto-enrollment. Once again, this is just like an introductory series to PKI for those that are maybe new to IT as a field or new to learning PKI, and so hopefully you find this helpful. If you do find it helpful, you can also visit my blog at https://x.509.blog, and feel free to leave comments at my blog or underneath this video. So specifically today we're going to be covering auto-enrollment. We're going to show how to configure auto-enrollment, and then later on show you how to troubleshoot auto-enrollment. So auto-enrollment, what is auto-enrollment? That's a good question, right? So auto-enrollment is basically this feature that allows you to in one configuration, it allows you to initially automatically enroll for a certificate and then renew those certificates. And then in another configuration, it allows you to automatically renew a certificate that you already requested. And so we'll be looking at both of those. But aside from requesting a certificate, it also pulls down some of your enterprise certs that are used in your organization. And so it's configured. There's two places really where auto-enrollment is configured. It's in group policy and on the certificate template. When you use auto-enrollment, it requires enterprise CA. It requires it's all domain joined machines that participate in auto-enrollment. And so of course it requires Active Directory. If you viewed the enrollment video, we talked about there's version 1, version 2, version 3, and version 4 templates. So certificate templates specifically. For auto-enrollment, you cannot use version 1 templates, but everything else you can use for auto-enrollment. So those are some of the prerequisites and requirements. So the first piece is really the template is really the first piece we really need to look at in terms of configuring auto-enrollment. So I'm going to go here into my template snap-in, and I'm going to find a certificate we can kind of look at and use for auto-enrollment. So let's see if we can find, do this copy of Kerberos authentication as an example. So the main thing that you need to configure in terms of auto-enrollment is really the security on the template, right? So if you want a user or computer or whatever the case may be, depending on the template, to enroll for, you do auto-enrollment, they basically have to have read, enroll, and auto-enroll permissions. So in this example, read's inherited, but basically you see enterprise domain controllers have read, enroll, and auto-enroll. So that's the main configuration that you need to do on the certificate template. And again, you're just provisioning this template to those users or computers that you want to get a certificate, and of course you're going to use groups instead of putting individual computer accounts in here or individual user accounts. So that's the main thing. There are some other things to be aware of. So like I said in the beginning, there's two kind of configurations for auto-enrollment. One is, you know, you're automatically enrolling for your initial certificate and you're renewing them, and the other one you're manually requesting the initial certificate and renewing them. The first scenario is generally for your computers or users. They're going to get a cert through auto-enrollment and renew that. The second configuration is more for like web servers. If you have web servers set up, you initially request like a web server cert, and then once you manually request that cert with whatever subject or subject alternative names you want to have in that certificate, then you can have that certificate automatically renew. And then of course IIS has a rebind feature that allows you to actually use that certificate. We're not going to, in this video, I'm not going to focus on that second sort of aspect of renewing certs for like web servers. I'll cover that in a different video. This is more for your typical, you know, laptops and users and workstations that are getting certificates. This is more what this is focused for, as well as domain controllers. So again, we do have to have our security configured properly. That's the main thing. But also here in subject name, so subject name on the template, if you're doing the first type of auto-enrollment, which is the main focus of this video, you're going to have this set to build from this Active Directory information, and this is going to allow the CA to pull attributes from Active Directory and then populate the subject or subject alternative name extension with the item, with the data that it finds in those attributes. And so that's normal auto-enrollment. If you're doing the auto-enrollment like I talked about for web servers, you would set this to supply in the request, because if it's a web server, obviously the web server administrator's got to select his subject or subject alternative names. And then if this was the right version template, So basically, if I went to compatibility and bumped this up to like 2008 R2, I believe, then I'd be able to check this little checkbox here that says basically use the subject information in the certificate for renewing the certificate. And so that would be if you're doing the web server part. But again, we're not doing that. We're focusing on widespread distribution of certificates for computers or users. So here we're going to have it set to build from this Active Directory information. There are some other things that you do need to consider. I'm not going to get too much into superseded templates today, but in this example, if my domain controller were to enroll for this copy of Kerberos authentication template, and it already had this Kerberos authentication certificate, then it would archive this Kerberos authentication certificate and leverage this copy of Kerberos authentication template. So that's sort of how that works. There are some, we're not going to get into the scenarios where that's applicable. We're just mainly focusing on auto enrollment. Another thing that may come into play is basically issuance requirements. Generally for auto enrollment, you're not going to want to have CA certificate manager approval required, because that's when the actually certificate manager is going in there, inspecting requests, and then approving them if they meet your business requirements or your security requirements, or whatever the case may be. Auto enrollment, we're trying to for the most use case scenarios, we're trying to distribute computer certs to all the computers or user certs to all the users. So we really don't want to have that sort of level of intervention working. So as far as the template, that's most of the things you need to be concerned about. Template, usually for if you're doing like a computer cert, you will usually duplicate. You will either use a duplicate of the workstation or a duplicate of the computer cert. And if you're doing a user cert, it'll typically be some duplication of the user cert. What I mean by that is when you want to create a new template, you click duplicate template, and then it creates your new template. You name it, configure it, all that sort of thing. So that's the template things you need to be concerned about. So we will go back to the presentation real quick. So this stuff we covered in the environment, so we took a look at all those different settings. So as far as auto enrollment is configured on a GPO, and I put here that is typically configured at a domain level. That may or may not be the case, because the one thing is, I think maybe I should probably take that out. You may configure it at the domain level, but a lot of times you don't want it to apply to everything. You may have a subset of computers that you want it to apply for. So for example, if you're issuing certs for VPN, obviously it makes sense to deploy those certs to laptops, but not necessarily desktops. And depending on the servers, it might not be a great idea to put some types of some servers. If you like auto enroll for certain templates, it may kind of interfere with some of the applications on those servers that already use certificates. So you may want to generally exclude certificates, exclude auto enrollment from certain systems like servers. So basically the last point here is basically you have two ways to control whether a computer or user auto enrolls for a certificate. One is through the application of the auto enrollment group policy. So obviously you need that group policy to apply to you to enable auto enrollment. So that's one way to configure it. And obviously with a group policy, you can specify it on certain OUs. You can use security filtering. You can do WMI filtering. So you have some options there. And the other way you can control whether auto enrollment works is if the user or computer has enroll and auto enroll permissions on a template. Read of course, but that's usually inherited. Just keep in mind you want to be careful with auto enrollment, because you can push out a lot of certificates in a very short amount of time. So you want to make sure that you're doing exactly what you plan to do. Maybe test it out in your pre-production environment first. So that's so that testing and all that validation is sort of key. There's another point I was going to touch on, but oh yeah, the other point is also be aware, like on most systems, the reason you want to be extra careful with auto enrollment, like for users, you usually don't want to have more than one client authentication cert, because if you as a user you have more than one client auth cert, you start to get prompted for which cert to select. And then for the computer, if you have like the same sort of template, so let's say you have 2 server authentication certs on your computer, or even 2 client authentication certs on your computer, there's always a question of like, how does the application or service that you're using that leverages those certs pick which one it's going to use, because maybe that could be a potential problem. Some applications have a way to bind specific certificates, so when you start to have more than one certificate with one purpose in either the computer or user store, you could run into trouble. So just when you're designing which certs you're going to auto enroll, kind of think about that as well. So we're going to take a look at the GPO here in this lab here. So I had some connections already being in this lab the other day. Hopefully we won't have any of those today. So mainly we're looking at the group policy. So I already have a group policy configured in here. So I'll go to, this is an actual group policy itself. And I'll show you where I have it configured. So I have this group policy objects. I have this, oh my, workstation auto enrollment, and this is auto enrollment configured, and I have it applied to my workstations OU, and I think also to my RDB test OU. And so in that group policy, since I think I already have it open here, for computer auto enrollment, it's going to be under Windows settings, security settings, public key policies. For user auto enrollment, it's going to be similar location, Windows settings, public key policies. And then so basically you go into here, you click on public key policies, and then it's the last item on the right hand side, and you can double click on that. This is actually, we're not actually looking at the group policy, we're looking at a result instead of policy, but basically we're effectively seeing the policy that's applied to this computer. So you'll see that it's set to enabled, and both these checkboxes are checked. This is typically the configuration you want if you're doing auto enrollment, because you want the computer to be able to enroll for certificates, but you also want that certificate management functionality as well. And obviously the text here in the GPO kind of tells you what that functionality is. So it's going to renew certificates. If you submitted a request and it's pending and it got approved, it'll help bring those certs down. It'll remove revoke certificates, and if you're using like that superseded template feature, it'll kind of update which certificates being used. So it does have that, auto enrollment does have that management functionality as well, so you want to kind of keep that in mind. I'll go back to the slide deck here briefly. So the auto enrollment client, so when you have that GPO and it applies to your system, that enables the auto enrollment client. The auto enrollment client is essentially like a scheduled task that kicks that off. So that's really what the group policy enables. So you'll see I have this user task. Is this the right one? Yep, I have this user task, and I have this system task, and these are both like the auto enrollment client tasks, if you will. So you see the system task, it runs at startup or offset of every 8 hours, and the user task is at log on or every 8 hours. So that's kind of what triggers it. Modifying this task is not supported, so you really shouldn't change any settings in here. Just kind of showing you where this is so you can understand like a little bit under the hood what's going on. And again, if you didn't watch my enrollment video, you probably want to watch that because it's going to give you more information on the enrollment process and let you understand that a little bit better. So again, so auto enrollment GPO enables the auto enrollment client. The auto enrollment client is basically initiated by a scheduled task. You can't modify it. Well, it's not supported to modify the auto enrollment scheduled task. And as we saw in the scheduled task, that runs for auto enrollment runs for the computer at boot up in every 8 hours and log on in every 8 hours. If you want to manually kick off the auto enrollment client, there's really 2 ways to do that. So one is to just do like a GP update force, and that'll go ahead and kick off the auto enrollment client. The other way, if you just want to kick off the auto enrollment client and don't want to mess with the GP update aspect of it, you can do cert util dash pulse, and this will kick it off for the computer. And then if you just want to do the user, you can do cert util dash pulse dash user. So that's how you can manually kick that off on the client. And you would normally do that like when you're testing or something like that. You would ordinarily do that. So we looked at the scheduled task, and we looked at some of the things that the auto enrollment client does. We've kind of mentioned that a couple times. I'm not going to go over that again. And so auto enrollment demo. So I showed you that I already have this group policy set up. So we know this group policy set up. So I have this client here. And I'm just going to kind of look into the certificate computer store here. So in my computer store, I already do have some certificates. Right, I already have these 3 certificates for different reasons. I'm just gonna, the one that's set up for auto enrollment, I believe is I want to say copy of computer, but we'll verify that here in a second. So I'm just going to delete this, so I don't have any more certificates in here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I have two options. I'll just do the GP update force here. Now when you do this, it's going to generate the request, the public and private key pair, send the request and the public key up to the CA, and then it needs to get enrolled for. So all that takes a little bit of time to happen, not usually too long. So what you want to do is, if you don't see it show up right away, you want to go to the root of this MMC and click refresh. And then you go in here and I should see my certificate. So I have my copy of computer certificate. Now normally you don't have to kick off the auto enrollment client. That would run, you know, at logon or actually boot up or every 8 hours. So it pretty much works like that. And then also as this certificate gets closer to expiring, it'll kind of renew. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the template again, because we did not, or I did not mention that. So let's go to copy of, what was the one I had open before? Copy of, oh, suddenly I'm clueless. Okay, here we go. So if you look at this template, it's set to be set, so the resulting certificate is going to have a validity period of 1 year. And this renewal period, 6 weeks. This means if auto enrollment client's enabled, the client will start trying to enroll this certificate 6 weeks before it expires. There's also another rule that prevents you from moving this too far up. So like, let's say if you wanted to move this to 6 months, so you want to renew at like 50% of the lifetime, it's actually not going to work, because the Windows code does either the period specified here or 80, it's either 80 or 85% of the lifetime, whichever. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say 85%. So it's either going to renew it at 85% or the renewal period specified here, whichever one is shorter. So if you set it at 50% with the 6 months, it's going to go with the 85%. So you have some limited control over that. The other thing that I guess could get in your way, it really doesn't happen much, so it's not really even worth mentioning. But if you do have these two checkboxes, check publish in AD, and then don't automatically re-enroll if that already exists in AD. This could be an issue where you might not get a certificate with auto enrollment if you've already gotten a certificate and it already exists in AD, and you have this little checkbox that says don't enroll for it if it's already in AD. But really, you should avoid both of these checkboxes. And I have a blog posting on my blog on this first checkbox and why you should not do that. Okay, so that covers that aspect of it. And I'll go back briefly to my slide deck. Okay, so troubleshooting. So there's really two things you really want to troubleshoot with the auto enrollment. So one is basically going to be the GPO or the template. So for the template, we saw that's pretty straightforward. You're just going to go in and make sure that the template's on your CA or CAs if you have multiple CAs. So you're just going to go in here and make sure that template's listed here under certificate templates. So if it's listed there, that's good. And then let's say this copy of computer one, if that's the one I'm troubleshooting, and now all of a sudden I can't find it. Copy of computer. Okay, so here we go. So I might want to check those other settings that I discussed earlier about templates, but usually the main ones I'm concerned about is the security. And I'm going to make sure whatever computer I'm on has read, enroll, and auto enroll to that template, and we see I've given that to domain computers, so all my computers will get it. Obviously domain controllers are not part of domain computers, so they won't get it, but so this looks good, right? So I have everything configured there in terms of the certificate template. So the next piece is to look at the group policy. So you want to make sure the group policy is in scope for the client. And so there's a couple ways to do that. I think I might already have some examples up here. Let's see if I do. So did I run that? Yeah, so you have a couple examples. So one is you can do like the rsop.msc, right? And this will bring up this, and then you can go down here and see if the GPO is configured for you, and make sure that this is set to enable, make sure the checkboxes are checked. You can check where the GPO is coming from. So that's definitely one way to check that it's in scope. And then the other way is you can do the GPO result. And so I've already done that. So I should just be able to bring up this report. and view that in here. Now obviously all your normal group policy troubleshooting applies. You know, you got to look out for if you have things like blocked inheritance and blocked inheritance, security filtering, WMI filtering. So you may have to roll some of that stuff in or out. But if you're not familiar with troubleshooting group policy and you're having problems with this, definitely find a group policy expert in your organization and get their assistance. And here you see in the GP result, you know, I have my auto enrollment settings and enabled, so we're all good to go. So those are the two main things that you can do. That's really the main two things you're going to look at. If you wanted to go a little bit further, I maybe caution you a little bit because usually you don't have to go this far, but there are some additional things you can do. So you can go ahead and enable. Well, first of all, you can go to this key here, HKey Local Machine Software Policies, Microsoft Cryptography, Auto Enrollment, and verify that this is set to 7. So there's a table later on in the presentation that will show you the different configurations for this. But basically 7 is enabled with the 2 checkboxes checked, so you can verify that's being applied to your system. That happens when the GPO is configured for that. The other thing you can do, and I don't remember if I had it set up on here, but we can go to Microsoft and we can go to cryptography, and we can go to auto enrollment, and you can create this AE event log level key and set it to 0, and that will enable the auto enrollment logging. Now I've never really had to use this because usually it's pretty simple. Either, you know, the template's not on the CA, you don't have permissions of the template, or you're not in scope for the GPO. It's pretty much usually what the issue is. It usually doesn't get more complex than that. We'll touch on a few other things that could be here in a minute. So once you enable that, you should basically have events that show up here. So let's see if we can get to Event Viewer. So we're going to go to Event Viewer, and I would imagine this would be in the application log. And I can't ever explain why Event Viewer is so slow. I guess it's just the data has to parse or whatever, but Event Viewer is always brutal in terms of having to wait for it. Yeah, so I have this these certificate services client policies here. So it looks like here that it was successfully authenticated. So it looks like it authenticated, went for the computer. It received a copy of the computer certificate. I'm kind of going backwards here. Here's some issue. It's looking, could not enroll for a workstation certificate of valid certification authority, could not be found to issue this template. So this is probably a situation where the this is not on the CA. So it's basically as part of the auto enrollment, it's probably looking at that workstation template and saying, hey, I have read, enroll, and auto enroll permissions. I should probably enroll for this. And then it goes to find the CA that has that template, and it's like, oh, I can't find one that has it, so it can't enroll. So that's probably what that is. If you go back to my video on auto enrollment, that'll kind of cover that stuff in detail. So again, you can use these logs, but generally either the things in scope for GPO, and then you have permissions of the template, and the template's on the CA, and that's pretty much most of the troubleshooting you have to do. There's some other things you could run out. Obviously, if your PKI is not trusted, you're definitely going to have problems there with auto enrollment, and then the rest is everything I already discussed. Are there some possible problems that could have come up that I haven't mentioned here? Of course, there's always something, but the majority of your issues are what I've discussed here. There's always some times where you have some weird, scenario, but that's like the 0.001% of the time that happens, so I'm not really concerned about that. Here's the auto enrollment settings that I showed you. So I showed you the 7 in the registry, so here's some of the other settings, so you can take a screenshot of this or whatever if you're interested in having that. Again, enabling the auto enrollment logging or even looking at this registry key are not something I ever really do in troubleshooting, but again, just trying to give you a little bit deeper look under the hood so you kind of know what the different tools are and different settings and stuff like that. And here's the auto enrollment logging. You can take a look at that if you'd like to. There is a article on troubleshooting auto enrollment. I'll try to include it in the notes. I have awful memory, so the chances of me remembering to do that are about 50-50, but I'll try to include that under the video in the notes. And so that's the other thing you may want to take a look at. It's pretty much covered everything we covered here, so just kind of written down. So if you want to add it to your KB or whatever, and then that'll give you the option to do that. And troubleshooting demo, we kind of went through troubleshooting, checking the GPO, checking the permissions on the template. So we did all that. We looked at the event log. And so that pretty much covers it. So that was covering auto enrollment. There is, like I said, the other auto enrollment option for like web servers where you're manually requesting the first cert and then renewing them automatically. I'll cover that probably in a separate video because that involves some IIS settings for the rebind, so I'll cover that in a separate video. I believe I have a blog on that, and I think if you go to my blog, I think I have a blog on setting that up, so you can go there and check that out. So if you like this video, pass it along, let others know about it. Feel free to leave a comment if you're interested in it. If you think this video sucked, then hey, say, Chris, it sucked because you didn't talk about this, or whatever the case may be. That's how constructive criticism is helpful as well. And then also you can reach out to me on my blog. There's a contact page, so you can feel free to contact me there. A note of caution, like most the rest of you, I am super busy, so I don't always have time to check that every day, so I'll try to do the best job that I can with that, but please be patient if you do leave a comment or question and you want me to get back to you, because it may take me some time. And so that's all I really have to cover today, so please, if you get a chance, check out my blog, view some of my other videos, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to view this video, and feel free to leave a comment, let me know if there's any way I can help out, and thank you.